You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld. Happy to be here today with an old friend, Peter van Dijck. Hi, Peter. It's good to
Hey,
see you and
Lou.
good to hear you.
It's good to see you too, man.
I've known Peter, let's see. Peter, it's got to be at least 20 years, maybe 25 years ago when we were in the nascent information architecture community. You were one of the many Peters in our world of IA. I think there were like 4 or 5 at least.
There were quite a few, yeah.
Yeah. And we're all still in touch, oddly. There was the Merholtz, there's Boersma, Morville. I'm sure I'm leaving some out, and Van Dyke. And Peter made a real contribution to the community as the author of Information Architecture for Designers, one of the early books that helped us get it going. And Peter is actually getting something else going right now. Peter is one of the people I know who's doing really interesting work with you flip that IA around and you get to AI. And I've been saying lately that AI has jumped the shark, and you know it because you can't have a drinking game based on mentions of AI anymore. You'll be absolutely blotto under the table by 8 a.m. So no more AI drinking game, Peter.
Yeah, AI, IA, I get very confused. It's all,
Well,
all
there's
the
that
same thing.
too. So Peter is currently based in Medellin in Colombia.
Yeah.
You've been there for a few years. You had an agency there for a number of years that you sold to Huge.
hmm
And nowadays, you're, as I said, working in AI with a partner, Andres Hernandez. I got that right, right?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. With Andres, we are basically trying to build useful AI products with an emphasis on useful.
And your company's called Simply Put.
Yeah, it
And
is.
we're going to talk a little bit later about what you're doing for my company. You are creating, with a little bit of help from us, the Rosenbot. In fact, the Rosenbot is created right now as of our recording on April 19, 2024, and is in beta. It's been a lot of fun to play with it. But I thought we would get started first by talking about AI at a more general level.
hmm
So it's like I'm a little embarrassed about this, Peter, but um, I, I, I still, even though I've known and been thinking about AI in one way or another for, well, since I was in grad school in the late 80s, um, I still feel like I'm not totally fluent in the current jargon that I should be. So I know there's things like AI and ML for machine learning and chatbots and LLMs, large language models. What do I need to know, and what do our listeners need to know at a very basic level in terms of the vocabulary to have a half decent conversation without sounding like an idiot?
Um, Good question. So So look, I mean, for me, the first thing was I really didn't want to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, for a long time because it's such a bad label, right? AI is just a silly label that people uh, put on anything that doesn't work yet. Once it works, it's no longer AI,
I
right? That's not my quote.
like it
So,
though.
so But we say AI because everybody else says AI, and then they kind of know what we're talking about. I think what most people talk about when they talk about that is large language models. So machine learning is just the machine using algorithms to learn, which has been around for a while, and then large language models became really effective. And I'm not the right person to talk about this, but the last few years in generating language. So then we get what people like to call generative AI, right? Where AI generates images, it generates voice, it generates text, and And without getting into the tech, it just turns out to be really, really, really good at making text, making words that make sense. Crazy good, and so good that many people in the space scratch their head and think like, why is it so good? I don't understand how it could. I know how it works, and I know it's going to be decent, but I don't understand why it's so good. Why can it actually do this?
Does that come down to language being predictable? I mean, the whole issue about the probabilistic analysis of.
I don't think it's just language being predictable. And it's a big, that is a crazy rabbit hole that I'm also not the right person to talk about, but it is not just, so yes, it technically to some degree it is just predicting stuff, right? The
Hmm.
next token, etc. At the same time, when you say it's just predicting stuff, I think you're underselling the real capability
Mm.
because it is generating meaningful content that is not just a prediction. It is not just like I remember initially people would say like, yeah, it's just picking stuff from the internet, right? It's not doing that. It is creating new language that actually has meaning. It is writing code that is not a copy of some code that already existed. It actually has meaning and it actually works. And that is the whole trick. And this is the rabbit hole we should avoid because, this is why I think also why everybody's partially so excited about quote unquote. We have a lot of quote unquote in this conversation.
Hmm.
Intelligence, etc. Right? Um, it is just baffling how good it is, and it is calling it prediction doesn't feel right.
Well, okay, so let's get beyond prediction. I mean, I know there's a lot of statistical analysis of semantic content that
Mm-hmm.
does power a big aspect of what we're calling AI, at least today, the generative AI that certainly is generating text like we are in the Rosenbot, or we will be shortly. But is a lot of the success that you're talking about that gets beyond that due to the ability of these machines to understand both syntax and structure if you teach it to them? Is that, in other words, it's got a better handle on the building blocks as well as the language to wrap those building blocks in so it can assemble those building blocks into new information, as you're suggesting. Is that kind of what it boils down to?
I think there's a bunch of things in that statement that are correct. So it does seem to be very good at it seems to have inferred syntax and grammar and stuff really well
Hmm.
from right the corpus of language. Um, but then there are other words in there like understanding and things like that that are just hard to talk about. But but yes, syntax and grammar it turns out to be very very good. In fact, one of the and not to talk about the Rosenbot all the time, but one of the things the steps in there at some point there is a potential step of can you rewrite this sentence to be more concise?
Hmm.
And it does so at the level almost of a human editor. And you know how good human editors are, right? When I try to say something, I say that in five different ways, and the editor works with me until I get it really precise. And these machines seem to be very good at that too. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know. And I don't think they're, clearly they're not an actual human editor, but
Well,
there's a lot of weird stuff in there.
so in my statement before, besides syntax and grammar, I was fishing, if it wasn't obvious, to what I was trying to get at was the ability of, in many cases, humans
Mm-hmm.
to establish what the entities or objects of content are for AI to understand and work with. and to glue together in new ways through syntax. I'm wondering if that is part of the secret sauce of successful AI. And of course, I like to make the case that who's better prepared to do that than information architects and our ilk?
Yes, and so yes, to some degree, I would say yes, but also I'm going to talk about embeddings for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So in the quote unquote AI, we part of what we do is we take pieces of content and we embed them. Embed means we put them in a 500 or 1000 or 1500 dimensional vector space, in which every little piece of that content now lives. So for example, if the word Lou Rosenfeld sits in there, this will live somewhere in this 1000 dimensional vector space close to things that are related to Lou Rosenfeld. And the really strange thing is when we as humans think about classifying things, we think about very human classifications,
Mm-hmm.
and we may have 20 facets or a whole bunch of categories, right, that we understand as humans, and they're kind of like easy to understand. But what the machine does, it creates its own classification in the form of these, let's call it 1000 embedding vectors. We don't know what they are. We don't have words for each of those 1000 vectors. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
One of them may mean something like nice person, but
So
there's 1000 of them.
it's semantic, but it doesn't have a semantic representation at least as a word. It's got a value,
Exactly.
but it doesn't have a word that's a label, I should say.
Exactly. We humans might not have made up that particular category, let's call it. But the machine has made up 1000, right? From
Right.
analyzing all these texts of things that seem to be go in the same bucket.
So let me ask you this. This is going to be very meta because one of the things the Rosenbot's going
Oh,
to do. Are you
wait,
ready for meta?
We're getting more meta?
Oh yeah. Oh, get this. Here,
Okay.
try this on for size. This podcast, like all the Rosenfeld Review podcasts, is something that the Rosenbot will know about.
Yes.
And in fact, you could argue, hey, Rosenbot, are you listening? Because this is the first time you're going to have heard about yourself.
Yes. That is meta.
That's really wild. But the question
And
I had, go ahead.
And so when we ask the Rosenbot in the future something about itself, this will be part of its knowledge about itself.
So awesome. So let's say in one of my podcasts, like, this one, I use the term Achilles heel.
Right.
How is the Rosenbot going to understand that I'm not talking about mythology, the fall of Troy or anything, and I'm not talking about podiatry, heels and whatnot. I'm talking about an expression that has nothing to do with either of those.
And I'm going to make up the answer to this, but I think it works something like this. This podcast will become embedded in the vector space, but the vector space was trained on the entire internet.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that's how it was defined. And therefore, it already knows there are different kinds of Achilles heels.
Okay. And one of the potential issues it's going to have, and this is true of any LLM based product, let's say, Achilles heel as an expression has been around forever. But I was just reading in the New Yorker today an article about gaslighting, and it actually traced the emergence of that term. It comes from the Hitchcock movie with, I guess, with Ingrid Bergman, and it came out in the early 40s called Gaslight. And at some point, gaslighting became a thing. Much later, like in the 70s or 80s, it started to be a verb. The language is always morphing that way, and that's what makes life really interesting in many respects. is our is how quickly and fluidly our ability to communicate changes. When a new term like a gaslighting or even an Achilles heel, when they emerge, our large language models can be quick to pick up on these new memes.
I don't know. I would suspect that in terms of its weights and its dimensions, it only knows stuff until it was trained. So if there's a new term after it was trained, it wouldn't have picked that up, I believe.
So it just takes some time. Like I think one of the earlier versions of Chat GPT that came out since 2016 thought that Trump was still president of the U.S. for quite some
Yeah,
time.
yeah, exactly. So those things as well. And then specific words, I'm not sure how it would represent that. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess
that's a tricky question. But I do think that they will continue to be retrained regularly.
I got to think there's going to
Also
be some.
they get better, you know.
Yeah, there's probably going to be some crack team of meme trackers at OpenAI and Google and places like that that are working on this. Another question, uh, and I'm not going to make you geek out too much on IA, but I'm really, and we can talk about this actually when we get into the Rosenbot of it, because it's already come up for us in our conversations. But I'm really interested
Right.
to think about how, like, more, I almost want to call them classical ways of having, of information retrieval, let's say, are going to play with
Mm-hmm.
approaches like the one we're trying out. So it can be as nuts and bolts as, well, I'm used to having a search box. Um, does that box double as an ask box, or do I have separate boxes? And how does the UI work? Or in another sense, I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years with my commercial database, adding metadata to it, which in many
Yeah.
cases was manually generated. How does that metadata play in an environment like what we're talking about here? So
Yeah.
I'm really interested in questions like that. Are you working on that now?
There's a lot of stuff. So it's really two questions, right? So the first one is about how we interact. And the way I think about it is, okay, so now we have, in a way, we have language as a technology,
Hmm.
which we did not have before. You know how we used to say writing is design?
Yeah, we got a book by that title.
There you go.
Yeah.
So now we have writing as a technology. So what does that mean for design, right? And for UI and for how we interact. So whether it's a box or two boxes or whatever, you know, zooming out, you can also think like, okay, how are we going to interact with this thing now that we have language as a technology, now that we have writing as design? I'm getting mixed up, but we can tell the machine, what we want. Before, the machine gave us options, it gave us an interface to interact with, gave us stuff to touch and buttons to click and right, a search box
Hmm.
to enter something in, etc. Now we can ask it. So I do think it'll take a bunch of years to figure all that stuff out, but I do think stuff will change in the human computer interaction model, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, in a way, my question assumes that we're ready to jump ahead to thinking about things at the UI level, but I don't think we even really understand the use cases yet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that is also like, so the reason why okay, so for me personally, the reason why at last year I said, you know what, this actually is interesting, as opposed to, with my apologies, crypto and Web3 and all that stuff, right? Which was boring, was that I saw the real use cases happening very quickly. So ChatGPT came out. Um, my kids' school was on that within weeks. The students, the teachers were on it. Every like the real use cases come out, and these are like useful use cases that they do not want to give up. Like they will say things like, "Yeah, my best buddy, ChatGPT," right? It feels like when Google came out, but even better to some degree.
Hmm.
So my feeling was, okay, this thing has real use cases by people who are not like early adopters or geeks or whatever. And so therefore it's interesting. Let's dig in. But I feel like, but you had a question, right?
Well, it was really like, look, do we even understand the use cases yet?
We
Uh,
don't. I don't think we do. Like we know it's useful, right? So the chatbot interface, which gives you a very open-ended entry point, and which gives very useful replies based on what the LLM knows. That by itself just turns out to be super useful.
mhm.
And then I think there is a whole the next 5 years of use cases to be discovered.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, you and I have already had conversations about how pure we should keep the conversational UI versus starting to sprinkle in, um,
Yeah.
GUI widgets and so forth. Because you're not really having a conversation with a human, you're having a conversation with a piece of technology. And unlike a human, you can put buttons on it and put things to click and touch, and as well as to type at or speak to. It's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. In fact, why
Yeah.
don't we?
It's also fascinating, sorry, that
No.
people say you're pushing my buttons.
Yeah, you're right about that. Well, this whole conversation kind of pushes my buttons, but I think we got to take a quick break, after which I think we should get into some of those specifics about uh, designing a specific chatbot that we're calling the Rosenbot. So we'll get right back to it in just a moment. Everyone else, thanks for being here. You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Lou. I'd like you to know about something new. It's the Designing with AI conference that Rosenfeld Media is putting on for the very first time, virtually, June 4th and 5th. It's a conference where we're going to cover a lot of the cool things that you can actually do as a UX designer, researcher, or writer using AI to make your job easier, to make your job more impactful. But we're also going to cover the other side of the coin, which is before you jump in with both feet, there are a number of things that you should be thinking about to avoid unintended consequences down the road. So we have 10 demos and case studies that will show you what you can be doing. We've got 6 fantastic panelists reviewing that work and helping you develop the critical thinking muscles you'll need to work with modern AI in 2024. I hope we'll see you at Designing with AI 2024, taking place June 4th and 5th. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm here with guest Peter van Dijck. We are talking about AI, a bit about IA, as much as some people think those things should really be included in the same sentence because it just gets so damn confusing. It's really kind of hard to avoid. And I think we should also talk about some other acronyms like UI and GUI. And let's just jump into it, Peter.
HCI.
Oh my God, ML. I mean, I think we need AI just to kind of help us keep up with all the jargon and all the acronyms. But we were talking a bit about UI. So, just to refresh you, if you're listening in, Peter and I are working with, well, his company is working on it. We're just contributing to it, a chat bot that's being trained on Rosenfeld Media content, which will be coming out pretty soon as part of our membership platform, and which we're calling the Rosenverse, by the way. But the Rosenbot is being trained on over 1,000 transcribed Rosenfeld Media conference sessions going back to 2015, on hundreds of our recorded and transcribed community sessions, which many of you have attended, as well as these podcasts, as well as the Rosenfeld Media library of books. It's about 60 titles. And we'll be adding more. But it's very exciting because we have this curated collection of content that's already pretty good. It's not like we're training a corporate onboarding system on content that's 98% what we in the biz call rot, redundant, outdated, and trivial content. This is actually curated content that's pretty evergreen. So we're very excited about that. In fact, um, I want to ask you about that, Peter. Do you think designing a a system like this is very different when your content is highly curated, like a publisher would have, for example, rather than taking content that is not very well curated? It's just there, and it might have those problems of being out of date or redundant or whatever. How is that as a design challenge? Does this create new issues when you're working with heavily curated content?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So you know the answer is yes, right? Like yes, you curated content works. If you just dump all of my enterprise content into a retrieval augmented generation chatbot, it's not going to be good. It's going to come up with a lot of like stuff that no longer makes sense, etc. But this has been very interesting. So your content is highly curated. One thing so the way the Rosenbot works is it's based on a large language model, GPT-4, and it pulls out semantically relevant content from the entire Rosenfeld library, right? So one thing we saw very early was, and I was a little surprised by this, it started to pull out a lot more book content than it would pull out sessions in which people are discussing stuff. And we realized that the reason was book content is already extremely highly edited. So every sentence in a book, every paragraph in a book carries a ton of semantic meaning. Whereas if I have a session, right, where people are just talking like we are doing now, um, it's interesting, but there's a lot less semantic meaning per
Hmm.
word, let's say. And so the system was recognizing that and just really digging out those books now. I think we've evolved it, and it's better. But also book content is just really good. So highly curated, highly edited um, content really works well in these systems. And I also think it's another thing that's really nice is that the scope of the system is very focused, right? So we are talking about product design, UX, research. There is a
Hmm.
set of things that are very related. So all the content is very focused on those kind of issues.
Right. The term persona has much more specific meaning in our domain than in the broader domain.
Exactly.
Right. Um, so, it is interesting, and one of the things we've certainly had to think about is how to balance out um, that issue of like more densely semantic content, like book content, coming up before um, the sources being displayed before less semantically dense content, like recordings from conference and community calls, conference sessions and community sessions, I should say. And there are business rules too. So we've had to think about making sure that that content from sessions, those session recordings come up higher
Hmm.
because our members are going to be able to play those right
Yeah,
away. But
that is true. And
the
also,
books they may
yeah, go
not
ahead.
own, and we don't want to cannibalize book sales. We want to give people some access to the ideas in the books, but we don't want to replace the books.
Yeah, and I don't think you replace the books. Like there is nothing like reading the actual book.
Right.
What the chatbot does is it takes specific small bits of knowledge related to what I'm talking about from various books, and it uses those to help it give good answers or give better answers, right? It doesn't replace reading a book. I still like. In fact, I would now I want to read the book more,
Right.
right? Now I actually want to get the book. Now it's been really, really interesting. And then the other interesting aspect to that whole discussion is that's how we are spending a ton of time on conversation quality, but this is the stuff we just talked about. That is the chatbot side of things. There is the human side of things, right? So then the question is, what do people want to ask a system like this? What do they want to converse about? What do they want out of it? And we won't know. And the whole industry is also, nobody knows this, and this is probably evolving really quickly. Um, until we do it, right? We don't know how a teacher wants to use ChatGPT until we have teachers using ChatGPT and until they start getting a sense of the capabilities and start using it and start learning it. And then, sorry, I'm rambling, but then we get back into UI, right? Because I do have a thing about, you know how people talk about like prompt engineering?
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, I have the 5 best prompts, and I'm gonna,
They'll sell them to you.
prompt engineering is the worst. Like if you have a user experience hat on or a user interface hat on, that is just terrible. There's no affordance, there's no, right? Humans should not have to prompt engineer. Humans should just say what they want, and the system should be good enough, smart enough, be it with text, be it with other interaction methods like UI buttons or whatever the case is, sound, voice, whatever, right? I don't care. Um, should be smart enough to give you what you want, to give you affordances so you can actually achieve what you're trying to achieve, right?
Well, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about just before the break, which is the on the UI side. I remember at one point a couple of weeks ago doing a little bit of testing with the Rosenbot, and the answers typically come out in bullet form, bullet points, or many of them do at least. And
Yeah.
some of those bullet points are really great. And I wanted to learn more about some individual bullet points. So we were talking about could you create a button or a link associated with each bullet point that allows us to go deeper into that point? It seems like the prompt development would be pretty trivial. The question I had for you was, is it okay to start thinking about things like buttons, even though we're in a conversation flow and you were like, yeah, whatever works best.
I think so. I mean, think about it like, and that is when you are talking to the Rosenbot on a laptop, right? So
That's
you have a
right.
relatively large screen and a mouse which you can point. On the phone, it's a little different. If you are speaking to the Rosenbot in audio form, right?
Hmm.
Let's imagine this is possible. Then you don't have a screen, you don't have buttons. So I think there's just a whole bunch of interaction models. But keeping it to the screen, I definitely think so. Prompt engineering for users is silly, and throwing away 20 years of, 30 years of whatever amount, no, hang on, 1967. So
Hmm.
50 years of user interface design is also silly.
But let me push back on the prompt engineering a silly point a bit. Isn't it still important for a person using a system like this to learn about their information needs simply by articulating it within the confines of the system? In other words, whether they're typing it or saying it out loud, it changes and hopefully improves as they do that. The act of expressing it improves it. And I know this from taking, reference librarianship 101. that it's an iterative process, and people often have to get it out verbally in the first place in order for them to even understand what it is they want.
You see, that is a very good point. The same way an engineer does, uses explain it to the ducky method, right? Like they explain something to a rubber ducky, and through explaining it, they better understand their problem and they come up with a solution
Right.
themselves. But that is not prompt engineering. Prompt engineering, as today being practiced, is writing things like you are a friendly whatever, and trying to make it do what you want. That is not okay in my book, because that's just bad user interface. If you have to like write long texts and save them in a Word document to try to get the system to do what you want, that is just it's
Oh, so like I had one experience. Yeah, we talked
mm,
about this, I believe, where I felt like the Rosenbot was only giving me information from books, and I know we've changed some of the weighting of different elements since then. But I kept telling it, I want you to give me articles, or I want you to. There was another case where I think I wanted it to summarize something in a certain way, and it wouldn't do it, and I felt
yeah.
like I had to kind of bully it almost to do what I wanted, and even then, it wouldn't necessarily work. Is that what you mean by it shouldn't like, I shouldn't have to get to that point of.
You shouldn't have to do any of that exactly. Like the system, first of all, should be good enough to do that, and they are evolving very quickly, right? There's a lot of engineering happening both in the Rosenbot, but in any commercial ChatGPT or whatever. That is not just the model, the large language model, but that is how you interact with it. That you don't see on the screen, but that is logic. Like let's ask the user a follow-up question in these particular cases or in
Mhm.
these kinds of cases.
Which I've noticed you started doing, and you at the conclusion of
Yes,
an answer, you're starting to have the Rosenbot look to re-engage and ask for, do you want me to summarize this, or do you want me to expand on that? That's been nice to see.
it seems to be helpful, and then it's very early, right? Like for me, this is like it's a new material. We are just figuring out the early baby steps of how all
Mhm.
this works. Um, um, and one way I think about it is like I go back to like, wait a minute, what is a good conversation, right? So, for example, if I have, with all due respect, a Jehovah Witness knocking on my door, I'm not looking forward to that conversation, right? If I have a person that listens to me and asks follow-up questions and wants to know more, and I feel connected to them, right? That is a good conversation. And so I think we as humans were like, we are conversational beings. And the way we are reproducing that now with this new language technology that we have, like language as a technology, it is super early steps, and um, there's a lot to learn. It'll
Yeah.
take years, I think.
Well, let's wrap this up. I have two questions for you. We'll have to go quickly. First question is, what's been the biggest surprise now that you've been working in this space for, well, not very long, but long by industry standards?
The biggest surprise has been it is very easy to make a demo. It is very hard to make a production level quality system.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting and a little surprising, and it should serve as a good caution for a lot of our listeners. Uh, my other question has got nothing to do with chatbots or AI or anything. We have a tradition on the Rosenfeld Review. I like to ask our guests for something of a gift for our listeners, something you've been finding really interesting that we should know about. What do you got for us?
Well, one thing I'm really passionate about is climate change. So I've been listening to this podcast. It's called My Climate Journey. First of all, the podcast is super interesting, but then if you have an interest in climate, you can also join their Slack community. And it is and the thing I found is that the whole climate community is super welcoming, very interesting. It's the challenge of a lifetime, and if you're at all interested, I would recommend checking it out.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the gift, and thank you for a great conversation. It's been so much fun working on this with you, and I'm glad we finally got an opportunity to collaborate after 25 years or so. So thanks, Peter, and everyone. We'll make sure a link to Simply Put Peter's company is in the show notes, and I hope you'll get a chance to try out the Rosenbot sometime in May, I believe, of 2024. Take care. Thanks, Peter.
Bye, Lou.
Hey, it's Lou. Thank you for listening to the latest Rosenfeld Review podcast. I really appreciate it. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to pop me an email, lou@rosenfeldmedia.com, tell me what you thought. Better yet, leave me the hell alone and post a review on your favorite podcast platform. Please feed the algorithm. It really does make a difference. We want to get the word out. If you like the word, give us a hand. And while I'm asking you for favors, don't forget, buy books. Support your favorite local independent publisher. We happen to be one, rosenfeldmedia.com. All those great UX books are there. So, thanks again.